Next, I will read Professor Henning's profile. His academic training consists of a diploma in economics from Johannes Gutenberg University in Mainz, a diploma as a banking economist of the Academy of German Cooperatives, a dissertation titled The International Business of Cooperative Banks in Germany. Also has a PhD granted by the University of Offenheim. About his career, he was an employee of a German travel agency in France. He was stagiaire at Banque Fédérative du Crédit Mutuel in France. Training at SGC Bank, a central institute of the German cooperative sector, with a particular interest in international business and trading options and shares at the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. He was head of international department at Volksbank Darmstadt, a cooperative bank of Darmstadt. Later, additionally, the head of the treasury and head of private banking at Volksbank Darmstadt, also a cooperative bank of Darmstadt. He is professor for economy, foreign trade consulting, and financing foreign trade at the University of Applied Science, Worms. Head of Master Program, International Business Administration at the University of Applied Science, Worms. He is Vice President at the University of Applied Science of Worms and is professor at the Frankfurt University of Applied Science. Additionally, he is consultant, in particular in the banking sector, BC Bank, speaker and instructor at different chambers of commerce. Also, author of the textbook Foreign Training and author of different articles and research papers concerning international business. Professor Henning undoubtedly has a great career, which I believe can contribute a lot to this international context. Without further ado, Professor Henning, the floor is yours.
Hola, buenos días y bienvenidos al Congreso título 10º Congreso Nacional y 5º Internacional de Estudiantes en Comercio Exterior a Universidad Autónoma del Estado Hidalgo. Me complace poder hablar sobre los SDG o Sustainable Development Goals en un discurso de apertura del Congreso. Esto es frecuente, pero no solo desde una perspectiva europea. Permítanme continuar ahora en inglés, ya que mi español todavía no es muy bueno. So I try to tell you a little bit about the SDG from a more or less European perspective, but not only the European perspective. So you might know these Sustainable Development Goals published by the United Nations. So there is no limit to the CO2 emissions, even if that is one of the biggest challenges at the moment. But you see here, these are 17 different goals concerning also, for example, no poverty or zero hunger, or to come to the last ones here, partnership for goals. So these different sustainable development goals are published by the United Nations. I will come to the aspects I want to present you here because mostly I'm focusing on the CO2 emission reductions. And the very first I want to tell you is what is the cost of CO2 emission reduction. And it's really impressive how the volume or the investment should be to reach the goals. So first of all, who's emitting at the present? That means in 2023, the CO2 emissions. And you see here, 34% are the source in China. So a third of all worldwide CO2 emissions are from China. Second largest, not wondering about, the USA, 12%. Followed by India, 7.6, and then Russia, Japan, Iran, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, and also Germany. But Germany has only 1.5% of the worldwide emissions. So you see the challenges to convince also China, for example, or also India to reduce CO2 emissions. And not to forget the United States. Why I'm telling also about the United States something. I will show you. So the goal of the Paris Agreement is to reduce or not to have higher rise of the heat of the temperature by more than 1.5% Celsius degree. But if you look here on the actual actions, the first one, if we only do what we have now at the moment, then might be that the temperature will rise by 2.7 or more degree, excuse me. Then if we see the goals, which we have until 2030, might be a little bit less. And if we have all done what we have committed on the Paris Agreement, then it's also 2.0. And in a very, very optimistic scenario, only 1.8. So you see, the challenge is really a big challenge. What is the amount we have to invest, therefore? It's calculated that we need a percentage of 7.5% of the GDP to reduce CO2 emissions to zero in 2050. What does that mean now in exact figures? For example, Mexico has a BIP of roundabout 1.8 billion US dollars in 2023. And if Mexico has to invest 7.5%, then it would be an amount of 134 billion US dollars per year. But Mexico was not a very big economy. We have a really very big challenge in the United States. They have to invest more than the Mexican GDP per year, by more than 2,000 billion US dollars per year. And if we now look on further questions, How big is the debt at the moment in the United States? It's at the moment at 121% of the GDP, of the US GDP. And then you have to invest 2,000 billion per year. That would increase really the American debt, the US American debt. Also, Germany has to invest a lot, 334 billion US dollars per year. And let's have a look here on the absolute figures. So the American debt at the moment is 30,000 billion US dollars. And then we should invest each year additionally 2,000 to reach the goals. And that's not very different to the European states, even if these single states are a little bit smaller, their economy. So you see here the depth of the different European states: Spain, Germany, Italy, France, and all the other European states. We have in Europe the debt of 13 billion US dollars at the moment. So really very big challenge. Here you have an additional impression on the amount we have to invest, or let's better say the government debt at the moment, and then it would be added by the investments to reduce CO2 emissions. These are the first one here, that's the middle, the calculated middle, and here that's the German situation, just a little bit higher than the average. But you see that we have other states which have really at the moment, a very high government debt. Then we have in Europe, let's say, really ambitious goals to reduce CO2 emissions. And now the European Union is afraid of, now if the European industry, of the European companies have to pay for their CO2 emissions by buying certificates to be allowed to have some CO2 emissions, then it would be a disadvantage in international trade or in international business. Because what would the companies, or what would all the importers do? They would import the goods from other countries where we have not the burden of to pay for CO2 emissions. Let's have a look what the idea of the European Union is. That's the initiative CBAM. And that's nothing else than Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. The objectives of this new mechanism is that the importers have to pay for CO2 emissions of their imports. And I will tell you a little bit about the actors of the CBAM mechanism and also how the calculation is done. So the European idea is the European Green Deal. It's called, and you see that on the right hand in the middle, Fit for 55. So European Union wants to reduce greenhouse gas emissions of at least 55% by 2030. And the new target now for 2040 is to reduce them by 90%. It's a very ambitious initiative. And how will we reach these goals? So the European companies, if they have CO2 emissions, have to buy therefore certificates which allow them to have these CO2 emissions. But you see, from, let's say, India or China, they have not to buy these certificates, and they are allowed to have these CO2 emissions in their production. So if we now in Europe are importing goods from India, from China, or any other country, we want to have a burden also like these certificates that European companies have to buy. That means we have to look for the carbon pricing. We have to address the companies which importing the goods aligned with the international policies, and that's in conformity with the WTO regulations. And we want to take in account that there is a carbon price which importers then have to pay. The very first sectors where we want to realize this new mechanism are these 6 industries. You see, the cement industry, iron and steel, aluminium, fertilizers, electricity, and hydrogen. So for these imports, the importer have to pay for the CO2 emissions which have been affected in the sourcing country. And you see here that's how the action is done. They are included by, or let's say, regulated by the custom authorities. And the importers have to declare the content of CO2 emissions of any imported good from these 6 industries. You see here on the left top, there are the reporting declarants. These are the importers, and the custom authorities have to look for if they have done all correct, and that is also listed